And the men here were blessed to have Brother Wayne Jones speak with us at our men's rally. He's here with us this morning again too. He taught Bible class. If you weren't here this morning, he's going to share a message with us this morning. His message this morning is planted to lean. Wayne and his wife Shanna Kay live in Littleton, Colorado, right out in the Denver area, where he serves as the president of the Bear Valley Bible Institute of Denver. Wayne's a graduate of the Memphis School of Preaching. He also holds degrees from Amherst University as well. He preached for several years at the university congregation in San Marcos, Texas, where, as he mentioned in Bible class this morning, was involved in several different areas of ministry there. He also hosts a podcast entitled Authentically Adam that deals with issues of marriage and fatherhood and family and those sort of topics. There was a bio in our handout that we had this weekend. It's been on the screen. It might, I don't know if you flip to that next slide, and that's the bio. That is not accurate. One thing I figured out this weekend, I figured out over the years, you can mispronounce a guy's name. You can say where he's wrong congregation. You mess up the grandkids, he'll fix it. So on the slide, it says he has 2 grandsons. That is incorrect. Has 3 grandchildren with 1 on the way. So and then I think there's also another son-in-law in the mix too. Oh yeah, we don't have to worry about the son-in-law. But we've been very blessed this weekend. Wayne, we thank you so much for being here with us. And you're in for a treat as Brother Wayne comes to preach to us this morning.
That other son-in-law has been here before. It's Garrett Sawyers, who's Corey and Melody's oldest son. So don't even worry about it. We're good. Took my daughter to Tennessee and left Denver, so he can stay off the bio as far as I'm concerned. It's been great to be here. I don't necessarily like to pause in the flow of worship to make personal comments. I think we're not here about me. We're not necessarily here about you. We're here about God, to honor Him and to love Him and to serve Him. But I did want to take just a moment to say thank you for who you are, for all that you've done, for all that you've been in the past. Told you in Bible class, told you over the weekend, you came with a great reputation to live up to, and you've lived up to that. The world at large respects what you do here, and that speaks highly of your faith and your commitment to the Lord. On behalf of the Bear Valley Bible Institute, thank you for the support over the years for the school, for the students. I know that Ezekiel Barnes and his wife are some that you support now. We are very proud of them. Know that they will do a great work back in Arizona when they graduate. Trying to get out as quickly as can because Julie will give birth just a couple of weeks after they graduate, and they're trying to get back to Arizona and not have the baby in Colorado. So pray for them. Certainly we'll miss them when they're gone. I love and appreciate your preachers. I love preachers, and I love preaching. I love ministry. I love that circle and that brotherhood and that fraternity. Sometimes it can be a divisive one, and so when I come across and come in contact with men who are not that way, and your preachers are not that way, it is a refreshing shot in the arm for me. So thank you guys for the hospitality this weekend, for the invitation, and I want to bring my wife back up here, so you may see us again at some point in the future. I want you to think with me this morning about a very difficult and tragic thought. I want you to think about what it would be like to be a Christian all by yourself. You realize that God did not have to build us into a family. He did not have to make us into a church. He could have saved us individually from our sins, and we should be thankful for that regardless of what He did with us after that moment. The fact that He has forgiven us and redeemed us and made us new creatures stands alone as a supreme blessing from God. But imagine if you were saved out of your sin and then left to yourself with no help, with no community, with no family. What a daunting task that would be. I would dare say that far, far more people would never make it through their life faithful to God if they didn't have a community of believers that surrounded them. A local brotherhood in a congregation like this where we can lean on one another. But then a brotherhood worldwide where we can share and rejoice and worship and cooperate and lean upon one another. But I will say this, that being a part of the family of God can be a taxing thing. We can find ourselves extremely vulnerable to the call of community, can't we? Because we are not saved to ourselves, then we do not live to ourselves. And with the blessing of having a brotherhood and a community come a laundry list of responsibilities on how we are to build that community and treat that community and live within that community. And most of our problems in the Lord's church come from the inability to get along in community. It's not necessarily doctrine that divides the majority of brethren that are divided. It is the inability to love and forgive and to share and to communicate. You see, we're called in places like Philippians 2 and verse 3 to not do anything that we do by selfish pursuit or by empty conceit, but with humility of mind, preferring one another over ourselves. Listen, I would say as Americans, we struggle with preference when it comes to going to the grocery store and driving down the road, don't we? Holding the door for someone and letting someone merge in our lane or letting them go in front of us at the grocery store can be very difficult things in the American spirit to be done. And yet we're called in Christianity to the bigger things, right? To the greater things, to say, I'll let you have your way. I'll let you win this argument. I'll let you handle this matter, and I'll take the back seat. I'll take the loss. We're also told in places like James 5 and verse 16 to confess our faults to one another, that we might pray for one another. Now, I'd ask you, have you ever struggled in the community of brotherhood to put the needs of everyone else ahead of your own and to confess when you're wrong to your fellow Christian? You know why we struggle with that? Because vulnerability is difficult. It requires a depth and a relationship that maybe we never forge or we never appreciate or we never find in the Lord's church. I would suggest that there is a number of Bible texts, one in particular, that highlights our ability to do this very thing, to lean where we are rooted. You see, I'm also convinced that a person who walks away from faithfulness, a person who walks away from the Lord, someone who turns their back on Christianity, doesn't necessarily do so because they don't want to be saved. I think many times it happens because they have no place to belong. They don't feel a part. Family would not be what they would use to describe the church. Community is not something that they feel a part of. In fact, many people who doubt doctrinal stances and who have issues with church policy end up staying because they are part of a community. They don't forsake, they don't leave because they would be leaving family, even family that they might disagree with or not get along with, because community means something to them. And I believe God instructs us in numerous texts about how to build that community, about how to create that type of brotherhood, about how to lean on one another in this difficult journey of life. The text I want us to consider for just a few moments together is Matthew chapter 18. So if you have your Bibles, I would encourage you open them to Matthew chapter 18. It is a lengthy chapter. We've already read several verses from it. We're going to consider the principles embedded in all of it, but we're not going to read it word for word this morning just for the sake of time. But we are going to draw from it some principles of building brotherhood, building community, and leaning on one another. Now, I believe the placement of Matthew 18 is really important to Matthew's gospel. You see, Matthew spends the first 10 chapters or so, 9 chapters, building the resume of Jesus to be qualified to be the Son of God. He is coming into a world claiming messiahship, claiming deity, claiming to be the Son of God, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And so in the first 9 chapters, Matthew lays out his resume. He was one who was born of royal lineage. He was one who antagonized sitting kings when he was born. He was one who was approved of by the voice of God from heaven at his baptism. He was the one who had the manifesto or the mandate in the Sermon on the Mount. He had the great power to work all the miracles in chapters 8 and 9. He lays out the resume of Jesus. And then really, off and on throughout the next 6 chapters or so, we get the reaction. So what does the world think when they see that? How do they embrace this newfound truth that Jesus is the Son of God, or that He claims to be the Son of God? So you have those who reject Him, and those who doubt Him, and those who follow Him, and those who make excuses. That culminates in that great conversation in Matthew 16 when Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Despite what others might say, we see who you are. We understand the resume. We appreciate your claims, and we believe you for who you say you are. Once that is determined, the next 7 or 8 chapters deals with information that you're going to need to know if you are part of a community like this. If He is your King and He is your Lord, how do you live? What does that mean for your riches and for your marriage? What does it mean for your spirit and your demeanor? And that's chapter 18. 18 is really all about building community. It's all about how you lean on one another. If Jesus is king, He's going to have a kingdom. And if He's king, we're going to be subject in that kingdom. We're going to be citizens there. And we're going to live and interact in those moments. Just like we said in Bible class, there's no magical formula that once you become a Christian, or once you're married, that you have no more differences between husband and wife. You just have people with differences who live under the same roof. Friends, the exact same thing is true in the Lord's church. There's nothing magical about becoming a Christian and all of a sudden we all agree on everything. We all know how to handle everything. We never get upset or get bent out of shape or have difficulties or miscommunication or misread situations. No, you say instead of taking 2 people and putting them under the same roof, as Christians you take 350 and put them under the same roof and say, now live in community. And so we need instruction on how to do that. And I think that Matthew chapter 18 provides 4 basic principles of what it takes to lean on one another in this life. The first one is found in verses 1 through 5, and that is we need a commitment to childlike humility. If we're going to be a community, a brotherhood that leans on one another, a church that is built into a family, that trusts one another, that confesses to one another, that puts one another ahead of our own needs and wants and wishes, we're going to have to develop a childlike humility. We have already read these 5 verses, but the conversation begins with this question: who's the greatest in the kingdom? You want to know what one spirit will tear down community quicker than anything? It's pride. And that's how the chapter starts. This is not a question about information. This is a question about elevation. What can I do to reach the seat to be the most important? Didn't the disciples struggle with this all through the earthly ministry of Jesus? They all struggled with who was the best, who was the greatest, who could speak first, who could make the most impact, who could be the most different. Some even got their mom involved. And coming to Jesus and saying, hey, you're about to die, because you've said you're going to go to Jerusalem and be delivered over the hands of the rulers, and you're going to die, and if you die, then someone's going to take over for you. So can my son sit at your right hand and your left hand? I think they were asking for who was going to be the next king. You're the king of a kingdom, and you're going to die. Somebody's got to take your place. You have no children. You're not married. How about putting my sons at your right hand and your left hand, and that way one of them will assume the throne when you're gone? I don't know if that's exactly what they were thinking, but it seems like it. Ego and pride and self-inflation and self-value and self-worth drive this conversation, and immediately Jesus shuts it down. You know who's going to be the greatest? Bring me a child. Put that child in my midst. That child has no formal training. It has no rabbinical instruction. It can't quote 10 Commandments at this point, probably. He has no pedigree. And yet, how quickly do children get over fights with each other? How easily is it do you get children to share and to help? I know it's difficult at times, but generally speaking, it can be corrected with a conversation. How much do they depend on other people for what they eat and what they wear and where they go? Children are not driven by ego. They begin with humility. And Jesus says if we're going to build community and lead on one another, it's going to take the humility of a child in the heart of every single Christian. Listen, I know that we're known for various things in our existence as congregations. Some are known for how beautiful they sing, and some are known for the powerful preaching that commands. Some are known for the children's home collections that they take up. This thing has multiplied since I've been here, and only been here 3 days. Friends, if we're going to be known for anything, if there could be any trait that identifies where we worship and who we are, I would suggest it's humility before anything else. That we're willing to take the back seat, to take the loss, to take the hits so that someone else can succeed and thrive, particularly so that God's kingdom can be advanced. If we're going to lean on one another, we're going to have to be humble enough to be down where the lowest are and allow them a shoulder to cry on and a place to lean and a place to stand and a place to belong. Second principle from Matthew chapter 18 is found in verses 6 through 11. Not only is it going to take the humility of a child to create community to where we can lean, it's going to take the elimination of stumbling blocks. It's going to take the elimination of stumbling blocks. Let's pick up in our reading in verse 6. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks. For it is inevitable that stumbling blocks come, but woe to the man from whom they come. If your hand causes you to stumble, here's where he talks about eliminating those stumbling blocks. Cut it off and throw it from you. It's better for you to have entered life crippled or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be cast into eternal fire. If your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out and throw it from you. It would be better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and to be cast into the fiery hell. See that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I say to you that their angels in heaven continue to see the face of my Father who is in heaven, for I, the Son of Man, have come to seek and to save the lost. With the child still sitting in their midst, Jesus offers this warning. And it's a warning about stumbling blocks. Now, I will tell you that historically, when I will preach or teach through this section, my illustration about stumbling blocks involves Legos. Some of those painful moments in life are when you don't expect there to be a Lego in the floor and it all of a sudden is embedded partway in your foot. Painful, right? Now, I like the illustration because it makes sense to us and we can see it and add some humor to our discussion. But in the last month of my life, I have learned a brand new illustration to explain stumbling blocks. The dangers of the uncertainty that's out there that causes us to trip. I made my first ever trip earlier this month to Cambodia. We have a Bear Valley Extension School there, and I was able to teach through 1st and 2nd Peter in that extension program and meet most of the people in Cambodia are first century Christians. In fact, all the students there were raised in homes that weren't Christian homes because the Christianity did not really exist in the country at large until 10 or 15 years ago, when people began to go and to make inroads and establish congregations and build schools. But I didn't realize that in the rural areas, and most of Cambodia is rural, and it's jungle, that there are still live, active landmines from the Vietnam War all over Cambodia. They're actually training rats to find landmines so that they can detect them, and they'll put cameras and trackers on these rodents, and they'll get there. They're not heavy enough to set them off, but they can find them so that they can go and dismantle them before someone accidentally steps on them. And it is a yearly normal thing. You will see people begging on the side of the road who've lost a leg, lost an arm in recent years because they were just moving through the jungle and came on a landmine. I think that's a better illustration of what Jesus is talking about here than Legos. See, I have a responsibility in my community to pull out those things that will catch us by surprise and cause us harm. I have to root them out and pull them up and dismantle them. Listen, church hurt, have you ever heard that phrase? Church hurt is a real thing. And again, it's not, going back to what we said earlier, I don't think it has a lot to do, as much to do with doctrine as it does to do with personality. And I've got to eliminate those. And we'll talk about more about how that takes place in the next 2 points. But we need to be a people who remove all landmines. all stumbling blocks to create a community where we can lean on one another. Because here's the thing, if I'm uncertain about what you think of me and how much you love me, it's going to be hard for me to lean on you. It's hard for me to confess my sin to you. How do I know that you'll keep it confidential? How do I know that you won't use it against me? Religion has done that in the past. The church has even done that in the past. I'm going to build community. I'm going to have to learn to eliminate the stumbling blocks. Number 3, I'm going to have to practice active restoration. Verses 10 through 20, we won't take the time to read all of these passages, but 10 through 20 reveal the format of active restoration. So there is someone who is hurt. There is someone who's no longer leaning on us, who's now leaning on the world, back in the world, and has forgotten their faith, left the church. What do? Well, the first thing we know is that Jesus is going to go get them, or try. Verse 12 starts with the shepherd who has 100 sheep, and he leaves them and finds the 100 that went away and leaves the 99 to bring them back. And other texts would suggest he bears them on their shoulders and he brings them back to the fold. Active restoration begins with the chief shepherd. But friends, we are his instruments of restoration in the local setting. He does that primarily through us. And that's what 15 and following is about. You know the text, how if a brother has aught against a brother, you go and you work that out between the two of you alone. If it doesn't work, you take witnesses. If it doesn't work, you tell the church. Why? All in hopes of getting them back, not pushing them away. What's interesting to me is if you couple Matthew 18 with Matthew 5, Matthew 18 is going to say that if you have aught against a brother, you go talk to him. Matthew 5 is going to say, if you know your brother has something against you, you go talk to him. Do you know if you put those two passages together, the people who have problems will always meet in the middle? They will. The command is different. Matthew 5 is, if you know your brother has a problem, go to him. Matthew 18 is, if you have a problem, go to a brother. No one will ever have to travel the entire distance if we take Matthew 5 and Matthew 18 and put them together. We will actively seek restoration together. We need that in the church. It is our responsibility. It is our call. But I'll tell you, friends, that's difficult. And it's hard. You ever had to psych yourself up for a difficult conversation? I mean, you practiced in the mirror. You wrote down what you were going to say. Maybe you dialed the phone number and you hung up before the last one registered because you just didn't know if you could say it the way you needed to say it. That's real. But it keeps us from leaning on one another. Listen, for a heart that loves the Lord and desires to do right, the person who seeks their restoration will be their hero, not their enemy. Who taught you the gospel? Who showed you that outside of Christ you could never have the hope of eternal life and the joy of forgiveness? Are you mad at them because they told you that? Do you hold them in disdain because they saw you as someone in need of salvation and actually had the nerve to point that out to you? Or do you thank them every day you see them for the hope of heaven that they instilled in you by seeking your restoration? Friends, the same is true among fellow church members, I believe. That's what it means to be a part of a community, to lean on one another and to depend on one another. And then finally, number 4, if we're going to be a people who are leaning on one another, creating community, we're going to have to offer and desire unlimited forgiveness. Unlimited forgiveness. Now, I would suggest that we see this unlimited nature of forgiveness in 2 ways. One is that the amount of times we forgive are not numbered, and the things we forgive for are not listed. It's just forgiveness. I don't have a list of things over here that says, if you do these things to me, I'll forgive you, but if it's one of these 2 or 3, forget about it. Unlimited forgiveness means no matter what you've done. It also means no matter how many times you've done it. That's actually the end of the chapter, isn't it? Peter hears all this discussion about the greatest in the kingdom. He hears the discussion about leaning on one another and actually restoring one another and removing the landmines and the stumbling blocks. And he says, okay, so how often do I have to do this? And he throws out this great big number that he thinks puts him at the top of the list of spiritual maturity. And Jesus takes it and multiplies it time and time and time and time and time again and says, every day you do that. Jesus wasn't trying to put a number on forgiveness. He was saying this: it doesn't matter how many times, and it doesn't matter what the infraction is. If they come to you, you forgive them, period. Confession and forgiveness is the heart of Christian community. And yet it's the hardest thing that we do in Christian community. So what we want people to think is that we were saved from our sins and now we're dressed nice, we act nice, we do nice things, and we're nice people and there's no problems. So we smile and we shake hands and we sing songs and we gather in buildings and everybody's great. The problem is that every one of us brings a struggle, a doubt, an insecurity, and maybe even a sin to every worship service we attend. And things are not always great. They're not always wonderful. In fact, we struggle, and what we want is to be forgiven and not excluded from the community. But we're afraid of our vulnerability, and so we don't confess because we're afraid we won't be forgiven, and so we just bury that sin. And then we distrust one another. We don't lean like we should. The parable that's told to illustrate this is probably one of the most familiar parables that Jesus ever told outside of Matthew 13. Matthew 13 contains a number of very familiar parables, but this one is extremely familiar, right? The master comes to settle accounts, and he finds a man who owes him. If you do the math based on the translation of money and the current culture that they lived in, this man owed a debt of 5 lifetimes. If you worked 70 years at a regular salary in the first century, and you worked that from the day you were born to the day you died with no vacation, it would take you, and save every dime that you made, it would take 5 lifetimes to save up what this man owed the master. The man said, "Have mercy on me. I can't pay." The master forgave him. The scene shifts and the man leaves and he finds a man who owes him 30 denarii, which is a month's wages. Forces the man to pay, and the man says to him exactly what he said to the master: "I don't have it. Give me time." He could have worked 1 month, saved that money, and paid off his debt. And the forgiven man said, "Not a chance. Throw him in jail until he can pay." And there were some bystanders who had seen both scenarios. They had watched both scenes of this parable unfold, and they were infuriated. So they went to the king and said, "Do you know what your forgiven servant just did?" And you know the story, right? The king brought him back in, threw him in prison until he could pay, which means for the rest of his life, because he would never earn enough money to pay off that debt. And then Jesus ends the whole story by saying this: "My heavenly Father will also do the same to you if each of you does not forgive his brother from your heart." Our community of leaning and loving one another, of depending on one another, is born out of the ability to confess based on the confidence that I'll be forgiven. Do you have someone in your life like that? Let me just ask you. Think in your circle, in your sphere, among your friends, your church members, your family. Do you have someone that you know, no matter what you've done, they will forgive you for it? I do. They're usually the first person I'll confess those things to. Mine is my wife. She's put up with a lot of immaturity. We were married at barely 19 and barely 18. We had no clue what we were doing. And so she has grown with me and forgiven me. And I know from her, no matter what I've done, I can have that conversation and she'll forgive me. And you know what? That makes those conversations really easy. Shouldn't that be the way we feel in the community of others who've also needed the same forgiveness? I think that's why God puts us in this moment. It's why God puts us here. Listen, Christianity is not the story of the Lone Ranger. It's not the story of a few good men. Not even the Magnificent Seven. We are in this together as a brotherhood. And thanks be to God that we are. What would life be if we didn't have each other? But it's up to us, friends, to cultivate a community where humility, protection, restoration, and forgiveness are mainstays. How much easier would it be for you to share your struggles if you knew no matter what and no matter how often it would never be held against you? Listen, friends, that's what makes Jesus so approachable, doesn't it? He hung on the cross and said, Father, forgive them. So I know if I haven't driven nails into his hands and put a crown of thorns on his head, if he forgave them, guess what? He'll forgive me. So I can talk to Jesus about my sin every day. I should be able to trust the people of God as much as I trust God himself. That's the consistency issue we've talked about all weekend. Can you do that? I'm going to move down and offer the invitation so I don't trip in coming down. And I'm going to tell you a quick story. When I preached in Texas, by the way, some of the greatest people that have ever lived are members of the University Church in San Marcos, Texas. But we were struggling through a season and a time where there was no public restoration. There was no public acknowledgement of sin. You offer the invitation week after week and Sunday after Sunday, and no one comes and responds. No one asks for prayers. And you begin to wonder as a preacher, are you doing something wrong? But I told a story not familiar with me or not originated with me. Another preacher had told the same similar story, and I told his story about the church where he preached. No one was responding there either. And he assumed it was because the front pew is the loneliest place to sit in a church assembly. Especially if you got there during the invitation song. Because all eyes are looking at you, all eyes are on you, everybody's kind of questioning what's going on, what are they doing, what happened in their life. Even if they're concerned about it, it causes this emotional angst. And so I told them, like this preacher told his congregation, he said, listen, no one will ever come sit on this pew by themselves again in this congregation. Somebody will come with you if you respond. Now, it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with the beauty of the people in Texas and their ability to lean on one another. It got to the point when someone responded, we would have 2 pews of people come forward. I had have a clue who was coming to repent and who was coming to support. And it created an issue, but I'll tell you what it did. It created an environment where no one felt like they had to bury their sin, dismiss their struggle, or avoid landmines all by themselves. And it changed the culture of that congregation. It changed the ability of people to believe. I don't know. I will tell you this. If you have struggled this morning and you have struggled leaning on people, we're going to offer the Lord's invitation for you to respond, whether to become a Christian or to make your life right or ask for prayers. I won't let you be by yourself. And from what I know about the people I've met here, I don't think they'll let you be by yourself either. Because we are in this together, aren't we? We are a community and we are a family, and thanks be to God for that. And let's practice as much as we can the love and forgiveness that it takes to build that up. Because I believe that will be attractive to the world. They'll want to be a part of a place like this. They'll want to know about the God who organized a situation like this and how they can find it. What a great and powerful world-changing thought it would be to be a part of a community that always leaned and never forsook one another. You have a God who stands to forgive you, who stands to heal you, who stands to accept you, and a church family, I have no doubt, that is there to do his bidding this moment if you have need, and will come while we stand and sing together.
Of the